Hello, folks. I'm Tim Bannister. This is the SIG Docs weekly meeting. It is the 2nd of March, 2021. Of course, in this meeting, we are going to treat each other as good people and follow the Cloud Native Computing Foundation Code of Conduct. So, the SIG Docs channel in the Kubernetes Slack has details of the meeting, including the agenda. So mosey on over there if you haven't got it, or put a message in the chat if you'd like some help. Otherwise, I'm going to crack on with the agenda. First up, is there anyone on this call who is new to SIG Docs and who would like to say hello? If you are new and want to say hello, you can either do that in the chat or just unmute and start talking. Hey, Jim. Where's the thing I wanted to leave? Okay, next thing, updates and reminders. This week's PR Wrangler is KB Hawkey, and next week's PR Wrangler is Only Dole, who I think that works well. I happen to know that works well for Taylor. Yep, if you're a approver, make sure you know your scheduled PR Wrangler shifts. Approvers and reviewers are the people who look after pull requests against the documentation and try to make sure that they get feedback so that we can move them forward and get them merged. Cool. Moving on to the agenda. Ray, would you like to talk about the release?
Yeah, so still current status is yellow. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Last week's branch sync was done in merge, and PR 26741 integration branch is still healthy. We do have a milestone coming up of code freezes coming up next week on March 9. And after code freeze is when the docs team will start to communicate with the enhancement owners. The reason why we're doing that is because the enhancements team is doing a lot of the communications, or all the communications right now. There are some enhancement owners that we will communicate this week that the enhancements teams pointed out that they've done, that they are done pinging. So we'll start pinging those enhancement owners. We had a few more doc PRs created. So currently tracking 27 docs out of 65 enhancements. Of those stats, 4 have been merged, 3 are in review, 6 draft, and the reason why it's yellow is that there are a lot of unknowns yet, and that's because we haven't started pinging those enhancement owners. There's 35 unknown enhancements, 35 enhancements that we don't know if they need doc PRs for 1.21.
Okay, cool. Doesn't sound like you have any questions or things that you need SIG Docs to rally around help right now. Is that correct, right?
There's one, it was a new PR just came in. It was with K8s. It's not tied to any specific enhancement, and the PR was made against the 121 branch. And so just out of curiosity, just because I know K8s is out of tree, but they want to add some documentation that will go into 1.21. So I'll probably, so don't have that listed on here, but I'll put it in the channel when I get the chance.
So one thing I will say is that SIG Docs delegates a lot of the technical review and workflow around SIG cluster lifecycle documentation to that SIG. Okay. They do a great job of reviewing changes and proposing changes and keeping on top of that stuff. Which we're really happy with. So I'm happy for them to take a lead.
Okay, that sounds good.
Our role there is mostly in terms of our SIG's review process to rubber stamp and approve stuff which has already gone through editing and review and so on. And we really have reason to sort of push back.
Okay, I will ping SIG cluster lifecycle.
Cool.
One more PR I brought up last week, and I didn't have this on the agenda. And last week it was the pod security policy pull request against the master branch on the API deprecation website, or to that page, and I brought up with the release team, and the consensus was to have it target the 1.21 branch instead of the master branch. But I'll put these in the notes.
Okay, thanks very much. To be honest, it still sounds like you've got all that under control, Ray. It's brilliant.
Thanks.
I just want to
Go ahead.
add one thing. So many PRs that's related to 1.21 is raised against the main branch. So I'm just commenting whichever I see. So I just want to let the folks know, keep an eye out. Some of them have LGTMs, but they have to go on the 1.21 release, but they are raised against, they are in the main branch. So it's nothing big. I'm just telling that this happens every cycle. So just keep an eye out for that one.
Yeah. Jim, since you're here, would you chuck that on the notes about branch mismatches?
Yep, will do.
Thanks. Okay. Let's move on to Anonymous Turtle is adding a. I'm not quite sure who that is, but maybe.
That's me.
Okay, cool.
I'm adding the PRs that we just talked about, the K8s PR and the other one. So.
Okay, so yeah, that's cool. We don't need to talk about them again. Let's move on to talk about third-party on dual source content. And now there's no named on this, so if it was your item, I'm handing over to you.
So I believe I added that from the quarterly review. It was brought up that just some general kind of checkpoint here. So today I didn't have much time to really get a good status point, but I want to start tracking it in our weekly meetings as far as any third-party dual source content, PRs to discuss, locations, comments, concerns, things of that nature. So more of a placeholder today, but in the future I plan on having more conversation focused around that as well.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
who's talking?
Jim Angel.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Jim, you're currently called SIG Docs, and also you've claimed the host, so I can't rename you.
Let me fix that.
But yeah, so what Jim is talking about, there is a long-standing piece of work that we need to do to follow Cloud Native Computing Foundation policy around how we reference third-party content, third-party details. So for example, if you've got a vendor like Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google, there's a few guidelines about, we put those in alphabetical order when we put them in lists. And essentially, the challenge is, those guidelines are, we don't want to be advertising products too much and looking like we are endorsing one vendor over another. We don't want to be, as a project, getting involved in those discussions. But at the same time, we do want to be signposting people to useful documentation that we're not maintaining. There's a whole bigger piece on this. And if you're interested, look for the issue about third-party content in our issue list, and you'll find it all. You can also ask on Slack if you have questions and want to talk about those before the next weekly meeting when we'll be discussing this more. Okay, on to the revised API reference. Okay, so this is something again from the quarterly review and previous work. We have a really fantastic improvement to the API reference brewing from Philippe Martin. The generator work is kind of done, it's merged. The remaining challenge is to migrate so that everything that links to the existing API reference links to the new API reference. Now that might mean changing URLs, it might mean coexistence. It needs a plan. And so next week, SIG Architecture are having a meeting, and I'm going to join SIG Architecture's meeting next week to discuss this on the agenda. I've organized this with GitHub user Dims, and we'll take it forward from there. Any questions about the revised API reference piece? Okay. Abigail, analytics.
Yes, hello. So this is something we also talked about in the quarterly planning meeting, and that is to take a closer look at our analytics dashboard, because we're collecting a lot of this information, but we're not actually using it. So part of that is to see if there's any website improvements or docs improvements we can make based off of the analytics we're seeing, and then also finding a way to generate reports and to make them available for people in the community. I know the localization teams have asked for this So getting that information out to them and how to generate the reports, and then the frequency people want to see it. So that's sort of the ask here is what the community would like to see, if anyone has any ideas on what types of reports they'd like to see and how frequently we should be sending them out. So if anyone has any ideas, we'd love to hear.
Yeah,
I
I
can
think
provide-
for sorry. So I think for the localization team, we can kind of drop a message and then tag few people that actually the owners of the respective localization group. And then we can move forward from the feedback. And for the general feedback itself, I'm not sure who is actually using these pages. Any ideas?
So I know that the Korean localization team relied upon this data heavily, more from the dashboard and overview, kind of like the top 10 pages or top 100 pages. They would use that to review progress they're making, as well as any areas compared to the English top 5 or top 10 of areas to look into to translate, or basically what are the most important pages to target for, you know, future releases, future work, things of that nature. And so this has been on my plate for a while. I'd like to hopefully make some progress on this quarter. But ultimately, some context and history on this is that we originally sent out a I think it's top 10 PDF report to our Kubernetes SIG Docs mailing list every single month. And ultimately, that was owned by Jared, one of the chair emeritus. And when Jared became an emeritus or emeriti, when he stepped down from being a co-chair, we ultimately stopped that report from getting sent out because the general feedback was it was noisy. I shouldn't say a lot of folks. There were a few folks that, you know, thought that the information was coming out too regularly, wasn't really worthwhile, and, you know, throwing a PDF into everyone's mailbox, you know, once a month seemed to be a little bit unnecessary. However, with the recent comments from the localization groups and some of our own general interest in analytics, it seems like there is value in providing the information. And so right now, I think the general rule of thumb, or at least what I've heard from Kohei from the Japanese localization team, mentioned potentially sending out once every 6 months, because this data shouldn't change at the rate of being monthly. Potentially just a 6-month email where we just send out, you know, here's the English localization PDF report, here's the Korean, Japanese, all the various different languages. And then folks can set up filters appropriately for that. Unfortunately, that's the best idea that I have. I'm open to other better ideas. We looked into originally exposing the analytic dashboard through some sort of kind of unauthenticated interface, and that doesn't appear to exist today, because that would be another model or another option, is if we made it publicly available, wide open, and kind of self-service for folks who want to get that data. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem available, at least without heavy, you know, technical debt and integration. But I think that the best solution right now would be to not only send out a report every 6 months, but also include information on Kubernetes website on how we could create filters to, you know, limit the noise for folks who don't want to, and make it an opt-in process for a better experience. And sorry, that was a long rant, but that's kind of where my thoughts are on this whole thing, and I'm open to feedback.
I think that thank you for the context and the history there. I think that makes kind of a lot of sense. Like you said, it's not going to be stuff that would change month to month. So maybe doing a 6-month would be really helpful for folks. Is this new? Were you thinking of that more for like just the localization team, or localization teams, or is that like for every language be sending out an email that goes out? I'm just not sure how they would be grouped, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So originally, it was focused mainly on localizations. Those were the folks that were actively involved with saying, all right, what is the popular documentation or the pages that I need to translate? But I do think that that's now becoming more of a broader scope where it's applicable to, you know, the English, I guess the English localization as well. So originally the reports were going to get sent out to the localization team email address. I think now it might be worthwhile creating some sort of SIG Docs reporting mailing list that's separate from the various entities, if you will, that could just cover all the reports. So the other challenge is that you can send out a report that includes a PDF or an email that includes a PDF of a summary that's defined based on what you want to see in the analytic dashboard. The challenge is it's only limited to, I believe the limit is 10 widgets in the dashboard. And so we have more than 10 localized languages. And so we couldn't break out each language into its own widget. And the data kind of gets a little hairy when you start to summarize it at such a high level. So I think, unfortunately, we're stuck sending out a PDF per localization or per dashboard with those widgets. I don't see a way to create like an aggregate where it sends an email with like 10 PDFs of all the different languages. It would be 10 separate emails, unfortunately, at least from my initial research.
So the only format available is PDF. What's the other? Sorry, the other format.
So I believe that Google defaults to a PDF, and I haven't looked too far into this, but I believe that the email itself attaches the PDF generalized report. The alternative potentially would be a public dashboard, but it seems like the technical debt might be too much to adopt. So pretty much stuck with PDF as far as I can see. That might be something worth investigating, though, just to confirm.
Thank you.
Abigail, with that in mind, any more thoughts on what the next steps might be and what you'd like to promote?
That's an excellent question. So I guess trying to figure out, confirm what Jim had said about the PDFs and the best way to send it out, and then sort of creating a separate email address that we can sort of set up to get so people can self-register for getting the analytics information that they want would probably be my next steps. If that makes sense to everybody. We can kind of move forward.
Yeah, that sounds great. And the other thing too is I have the instructions on creating the mailing list as I was going to do for the localization reports. I think that, like I said, we might want to pivot to more of a standard SIG Docs reporting group, but I'll pull that up and I'll throw it in the agenda too, and we can definitely synchronize on that.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, well, that is the agenda, but there is room if anyone has more things they want to talk about on analytics or more things they want to propose for discussion just now. Now is the right time to speak if that's on your mind. Yevi?
By the way, Tim, I have questions regarding the kubectl cheat sheet that we mentioned in the quarterly meeting before. Have we had a discussion with SIG CLI before this?
So if it's okay, Yevi, I'm going to summarize what I think the context is. In the quarterly meeting, we discussed an open issue about the fact that there's two lots of kubectl documentation. There is a kubectl handbook, which is published into Netlify, hosted by the Kubernetes project. And there is also the kubectl documentation inside the Kubernetes website. Now, SIG Docs is more heavily involved in generating and looking after the kubectl documentation on kubernetes.io. And SIG CLI is more involved in the kubectl handbook. But I think the ideal, it feels to me like the ideal is that we merge these and we have a discussion with the CLI, Special Interest Group, to find a common ground and to make the experience for people visiting the website smooth. We haven't, it's a few days, less than a week since that quarterly meeting. So I don't know what actions have happened.
Okay, then. So, so we can kind of like, should we come to the the Google groups and then mentions these things, or should I just kind of drop by in their Slack channel and bring up the discussions? What's usually happen for this kind of discussions?
So what I've done with SIG architecture is I started with Slack. So I'm going to do a similar thing as I mentioned, to go and talk to SIG architecture about the API reference. And my approach there was to kick off a discussion in Slack. And actually, I'm quite grateful because it kind of got overlooked, but then someone in SIG Arch came back and picked it up, and I didn't have to. I dropped the ball on that a bit. But yeah, following that up with, a more formal discussion, and then for the API reference, I'm going to join that SIG's meeting. So I think, essentially one SIG goes to the other SIG's weekly meeting feels like the right pattern.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that, people? Maybe I'll ask a question. Who here is involved substantially in another special interest group? One person we've heard from already. Ray, anyone else?
Interesting. What? Sorry.
Okay, so the Kubernetes project is organized in a sort of family of overlapping groups called special interest groups. So this is the documentation, special interest groups, and then there's a group for API machinery, a group for application APIs like deployment and replica set. There's a group for networking and others like it. The groups that we're going to liaise with that we talked about today are architecture for the API reference and CLI, command line interface, for the kubectl documentation overlap.
Okay, I thought you were talking about translated the other language.
So this is really something that we will do all upstream. And in fact, for both of these things, the documentation we talk about is largely generated. So the localization process for generated documentation is a bit different. It's not really to do with localization. This is to do with the overlap between different groups and having good communication. So the piece of work that I'm going to do and that Irvi is talking about is about communication between different groups, so that we don't work in our own bubbles, basically, and so that we do end up collaborating to provide a good experience for the Kubernetes community.
I understand. So the English team lead communicate with the other teams with this group, sorry, and then the other channel, the other language, get information from you. That's how it's supposed to be. Am I right?
I didn't really understand the question, I'm afraid.
I'm just trying to get the process in the right way. You get all the changes, you get all the documentation from the groups, and you make all the new changes available on the documentation, and then the other groups, the other language group, translation groups, and make they work. Maybe I misunderstood your question. Sorry, Jim.
Well, so the question was, are people involved in different special interest groups? Not necessarily localization teams, that's a different thing. I do know there are people here who are involved in different localizations, but I was asking about people who might be involved in different contribution groups. So people who write different bits of Kubernetes code, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Was there anyone who would like to speak about relationships between special interest groups, because they are also involved in another SIG?
I guess in what sense? I'm happy to chat about it. I have a involvement in SIG release as well as SIG docs, but I guess what are you looking for as far as the relationship?
Yevi?
Yeah, usually I take along in the SIG release or SIG contracts meetings, and if let's say we from another SIGs have some agenda that need to be discussed with them, then we can kind of write the informations or issues that we want to share, and then we will discuss it in their meetings. So both of the SIGs will kind of trying to find solutions for the issues that we are discussing in the meeting. So basically, we are trying to kind of finding a common grounds on how to proceed with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, and feel free to interrupt me if I misunderstood your question, but I feel like, you know, part of Kubernetes and having multiple SIGs, part of it is collaboration. So a lot of folks are open to different SIGs dropping into various meetings, bringing up action items, agendas. It's helpful to give folks a heads up that you want to have that discussion to make sure the audience is correct and the timing and place is correct. One other thing that I've heard recently from some of the steering committee is making less decisions in SIG meetings and more out in the open. And I like the idea. You know, I know that personally, I'm not always the best at not making a decision in a meeting setting, but what the rule of thumb is that don't make a decision inside of a SIG meeting, but actually advertise the decisions on mailing lists and make sure that it's widely advertised and widely communicated, just so there's more folks that are aware. And this is a little bit of a side tangent, more about the fact that a lot of folks are involved in multiple SIGs and everyone can't be at every meeting at every single time. And so by putting some of these comments out in mailing lists, potentially mailing the various SIGs and copying them together under one group, I think that's a great way to start, because now there's a record of the engagement prior to having that meeting there. So I guess the takeaway there is that these SIG Docs meetings and any of the other SIG weekly meetings is more about alignment, general issues, direction, things of that nature, but overall goals and decisions and major changes should be communicated widely. And a tangent on that tangent, I plan on sending out our quarterly meeting on our mailing list, just for general awareness for folks who couldn't attend, a quick summary as well.
So my summary of that is that, Ivy, you're going to look at reaching out to the kubectl people. If there is a decision, that'll be probably done the way that Jim said, rather than just during a weekly call of one of those SIGs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do a similar thing with the migration to the new API reference.
Okay, sure.
Any questions on that, folks? Any more topics for today's meeting? I'll do a countdown.
I would like to do a last comment. I know that this is the right moment, but this is what about Jim mentioned about the analytics. There is a way that use Slack to show the Google Analytics. I don't know if it's related. I'm just reading, doing a good a quick lecture. So I'm gonna share the link on the channel of Slack. Maybe that's useful, maybe not. I don't know, but I'll just share the possibility.
What I think you're saying is that there's some more discussion about the topic Abigail brought up about analytics, and you're going to take that to the SIG Docs channel on Kubernetes Slack to discuss it further, and you're going to post a link. I'm
going to post a link. I think that maybe there is a way to use a Slack a sub application of Slack to show or to share the documents. I just gonna read it or share in the Slack channel. I think I'm gonna share it on the Slack channel.
Cool. So this is about sharing the reports via Slack?
Apparently.
Cool. Sharing reports via Slack sounds like another good thing that we could look at for sure. I can imagine that the same challenges with noise might come up, so it might be a separate channel, it might be its own channel. We could discuss that in more detail.
I think that's one of the channels that was used before So I remember like on weekly basis, the document was shared on SIG Docs Slack and then forwarded to all the SIG location teams, well, Slack channels that were interested. So it was a way to fan out the documentation just to the groups that are interested in. Maybe it's a way to be less noisy, I guess.
That sounds like a really interesting suggestion, and I think we'll look into it. Cool.
And just something to add to the meeting that from the Spanish team, I'm Royal. We are starting weekly meetings, so to try to get everything started, we have we were on an event last January on El Salvador. It's a country in South America, and we grab out of people interested in the project and working on documentation. So we are trying to get more people involved, and I think that these weekly meetings, it's a bit overkill right now, but it's something to get things started. I just want to say that so far it's working. So fingers crossed. And then another thing related to the collaboration with .6, I am usually helping also contributor experience, and I think it's something really useful for the localization teams to get involved on bringing new people that speak your language to the communities. Also, probably we will work on some like documentation on how to, for example, run hackathons for documentation, on how to talk on events. We have a set of slide decks regarding documentation and how to contribute to the Kubernetes website. And we usually give those talks in Spanish here at least in Spain. So we try to build a kind of framework so any localization team can have like do talks regarding his language, because at the end it's the same thing, just change the language. And that's something that we are working on. And probably when we have something more formal, we will share with the rest of the localization teams and the SIG Docs also, okay?
Cool, that sounds great. I realized we didn't actually have any topic of localization update on the meeting. Does anyone, maybe Brad, want to give a really quick update on localization?
Oh, sure. We had a meeting just yesterday, our monthly meeting, and you know, got a few loose ends to tie up. There's some tool. There's a script that we want to get documented in the Mage localization page. Still a little bit of a concern of those. I think they're called TOML files. So there's basically a certain file that only, the localization teams do not have the ability to make changes to, but only, I guess the leaders or the English maintainers can. And so there is still a little bit of a concern, about the process of what we agreed on with Irvi was that the tech leaders would be willing to take, get Slack messages to say, hey, I have to make a change to the TOML file. Could you please expedite a review? And so we are going to try that. And I think there was just a suggestion that maybe, so for example, some of the localization teams, like the Korea team, were aware of that process. But I think we might need to document that, hey, if the localization team needs a PR to be expedited reviewed by one of the SIG doc leaders that have the ability to merge that file, that was the process. So we think we can make that process. And Irvi can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the reason why it was very difficult to set up the permissions so that the people in a particular localization could actually have access to those files because of where they're located, I believe. And I don't know if Irvi remembers the topic. It was from a way back and we just talked about it at this meeting. So we're just going to watch that issue and make sure that that's still manageable. But so far so good. The best practices that we put in place, putting the localization prefix code in the subject of the PR, the pull request title. People like that, and they're going to start doing it, and the other things. And we still have more progress to make. Irvi, did you want to add anything to that?
Since I didn't attend yesterday meeting, so if I remember correctly, the discussions about the owners files, especially for the English one, is will be like a superset for all of the owners of other localization as well. So that's also like a challenge if you want to kind of separate the approver for each of the language itself.
I think that the problem is that all those files are under the ID18N folder, and that folder belongs to the root owner. So maybe we can find a way to move this TOML file under the language path. So it's under /s or /Korean, and then the owners of that folder will be able to edit that. But right now they are in the root folder, and those TOML files is just like short names of or actions like feedback, yes, no, caution, some keywords that are replaced during the building of the UGOF site.
My advice is this sounds like an issue. And with my day job hat on, I'd like to see it logged as an issue.
Sure. Ryle, do you want to just log as an issue? I know we discussed, I know we did bring it up once before and there was some reason, but let's relog as an issue and we'll make sure we get it covered fully again.
Okay, I can create the issue.
Yep.
I can look if it exists, and if it exists, I can like ping someone to get things done. And if it's missing, I can create a new one, adding some documentation about what's the problem and like.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Ryle.
Okay. I'm getting the sense that we've discussed what we need to discuss for the week. I'll do another countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's a SIG meeting, people. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.